We're gonna go over strength training for mixed martial arts, and we're gonna start right now. Strength training for mixed martial arts is one of the more challenging tasks that a strength and conditioning coach can take on. There's so many different moving parts. I've been fortunate enough in my past, long ago, that I was working with CARMELO MARRERO. This is a guy who fought Gabe Gonzaga, who beat Czech Congo. He's fought in Bellator and in UFC and multiple other organizations, but he has had some big wins, and I was able to do a lot of his strength work for a little while, and it was very challenging. This was early on in my career. And when I took that step back and almost got out of the fight game, where I really just started to focus on power-based sports like weightlifting, like track and field, like football, like wrestling, volleyball, all these other sports. And I do love mixed martial arts, and I would be willing to train somebody in mixed martial arts. Someone, please, ask me to train them. Anyway, all of those factors that go into the sport just started to really fill up in my brain. And the biggest thing that we have to understand, if you're an athlete in mixed martial arts, is the actual technical side behind the sport. This is a sport that is extremely technical, right? The striking's technical, the submissions are technical, the grappling, the wrestling is technical. If you look at boxing alone as a sport is called the sweet science. Now you factor in all these other moving pieces and being a technical individual while you're getting hit, while you're taking on a physical beating, and the challenge becomes not losing your mindset, not losing your cool, and staying in and focusing on what you need to do. So strength and conditioning coaches have to recognize this, right? The main focus here is going to be focusing on technical prowess. But now let's dive into those strength training elements that you can utilize, that you can hone in on to improve your performance inside the cage. That first key element is gonna be straight up mobility, okay? You've gotta have mobility in your ankles. You've gotta be able to move rapidly from your ankles. You gotta be able to have mobility in your hips. If you watch the best wrestlers in the world, and that's the one thing that we've gotta do with MMA, is that you gotta look at it and go, all right, what are the best wrestlers in the world doing? Let's try to emulate them. What are the best boxers in the world doing? Let's try to pull some pieces from boxing. What are the best guys in Muay Thai doing? Let's pull some pieces. What are the best guys in BJJ doing? Let's pull some pieces. And that's where, especially if we're thinking about mobility, being mobile in our shoulders, being mobile in all of our joints, okay, so that we have that integrity. We've got to know mobility is defined as passive flexibility with stability in those ranges, okay? So if someone has incredible passive flexibility, but they're not stable there, then they're flexible, but they're not mobile. So we need to be able to have those hips be mobile through deep ranges, ankles mobile through deep ranges, shoulders mobile through deep ranges. And not only so that we can avoid being submitted in certain positions, but also so that we have that joint integrity to handle the training and to handle the deeper positions that we might need to hit, to throw punches, to move rapidly from side to side, forward, backward, whatever you need to do. So we've got to focus on mobility. That's that first key element that we need to hammer home when we're training mixed martial artists. That next key element is going to be a factor that I believe a lot of the best mixed martial arts strength coaches tend to miss. Now, some of the best guys in the game, someone like DARU, these are guys that are absolutely the best, and you can see what he does with his, with Dustin Poirier and how he trains him. He gets it, okay? Dynamic trunk control. Okay, so if I want to move my head, if I'm moving my head, but I have trunk control here, now all of a sudden, because of my trunk control, I can move my opponent with my head if they're zeroing in on my head, okay, or with my feet, while I have trunk control here in my abs, in my back. I have that co-contraction going on. I can take force a little bit more easily. So if someone takes a shot or if someone's hitting me, I have that dynamic trunk control to absorb that energy. I can move rapidly in the octagon or in the cage. I can move more rapidly laterally while having trunk control if I'm collapsing all over the place and I'm not doing that on purpose, now that puts me in a position, especially if you watch guys when they're fatigued. I think about, I know this is like a meme, but watch someone like Zab Judah, a boxer, you know, when he was fighting KOSTYA, and he's all over the place because he started to get tired and he lacked that dynamic trunk control, okay? So the dynamic trunk control is gonna help you take that hit, and it's also gonna contribute to supporting that neck, okay? So if our neck has that good strength and we're stable with that dynamic trunk control, now we're gonna be able to take that hit. So we have to train dynamic trunk control effectively when we're training our mixed martial artists. The next key element is going to be power and coordination. Now, this is essentially this mixture of all these different moving pieces. Power and coordination, okay? So what encompasses power? We want strength, we want speed. So we need to figure out when we're training our athletes, do they have great absolute strength? Are they someone who's on the mat, they just feel really, really heavy? All right, well, if they are, well, now that sort of puts us down that flow chart where we gotta train the speed. If we have someone who's extremely fast, but they don't have a lot of strength, well, now we gotta start to focus on their power output, so that we need to build up their strength. Maybe they're pathetically weak. They can barely bench press, you know, dumbbell bench 40-pound dumbbells, but they're really, really rapid when they throw a punch. So they can coordinate rapidly, but they have no strength behind it, so they lack power, okay? So we have to find the balance. We don't need our MMA guys to be bodybuilders, to be power lifters, okay? They don't need to be really, really, really crazy strong, but they have to be strong enough to get through various positions when they're grappling. They have to be strong enough so that they have really, really good power. And we also have to recognize that absolute strength does contribute to power output, okay? So does speed. So we have to be focusing on the right movements in the cage and in training that transfer to the cage that focus on speed. And then when we factor in power and coordination, coordination is gonna be, you know, you're in a training situation, and while you're doing a lift, let's say you do a back squat, right? You're doing a 4 sets of 5 back squat. While you're resting, now you can start playing around, playing games, catching various bouncy balls or toys or whatever to work on your coordination, and that's gonna help with your hand-eye coordination, but you can also do things like French contrast training that will help with your coordination, that will help with absolute strength and speed at the exact same time, so you can start to get creative. We've got to recognize power output and coordination is paramount for MMA training. Finally, what I believe to be extremely key when we're talking about combat sports, endurance, okay? We've all seen guys that come out and they're just dropping huge bombs. It's like Don Frye fighting back in Pride back in the mid-2000s, but he has no endurance. You know, Don Frye actually did have decent endurance, but now let's think about someone along those lines today just dropping huge bombs for 30 to 45 seconds and then they're gassed. If we're in a championship fight in the UFC, it's 5-minute rounds for 5 rounds. Okay, 25 minutes of scrapping. Okay, so if we have somebody who's not fighting for the championship, they're gonna do 3 5-minute rounds. That's typically what you're gonna see in MMA. You're gonna have 3 rounds of 5 minutes for most of these fights. So we have to have really good endurance. We have to be able to handle and sustain it. So we need to train endurance in a means that's not gonna pull away from power and coordination, that's not gonna pull away from dynamic trunk control, that's not gonna pull away from mobility. So we can do some steady state stuff, some cyclical based stuff, we can do some sauna work, we can do some sprint, some high intensity interval stuff, but we don't want that to pull away from our strength. We don't want that to pull away from the skill work that we're gonna be doing. So endurance-based training is a key component behind being an elite MMA fighter. So conditioning is absolutely king, because if we can last a little bit longer, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes into a fight, now our opponent can start to make mistakes, and because we're more technically sound and we have more power development and we're more coordinated, now we can really take advantage of all this. So when we're training mixed martial artists, strength and conditioning coaches have to analyze, they have to come up with tests. All right, what are the glaring weaknesses for this athlete, okay? Ultimately, that number one key element isn't any of these physical traits. It's absolutely coming back to we have to have really good technique in our stand-up. We have to have technique on the ground. We have to have good submissions. We have to have good understanding of combat and grappling in all realms of the actual sport. But then you factor in endurance. We don't want to pull away from that technical skill, okay? So we need to get creative with endurance. We want to focus on dynamic trunk control. We can then start to understand transfer of training. How can we hit dynamic trunk control? How can we hit, power production? How can we hit coordination? all at the same time. If we have the right idea of understanding transfer of training, now we're not gonna pull away from one another. Now we're all gonna feed into that technique that they need inside the cage while still developing the body to be a complete, total freight train so that they can go in and dominate. So again, we've got to be, as strength coaches, take that step back. Don't look at the weights on the bar. Focus on the glaring issues that these fighters have. Focus on those glaring issues, develop them, and at the same time recognize the number one key factor is we are just supplementing what they're gonna be doing inside the cage and inside that fight game. So if you need help with that MMA training, you need some direction, you need to know how to figure this out and how many days a week, click on the link down below, go to garagestrength.com, pick up your MMA strength training program today so we can help you dominate your opponents. Until next time, guys, peace.